that dynamic that I'm describing at work in the news today, that indication that, well, for all our faults, we must be doing something right. If even the people who other countries spring from our prisons through diplomatic negotiations nevertheless want to stay here after they are sprung. I feel like that dynamic it's also a reminder that what we do have in this country is unique. And it's not inevitable. I mean, what sets us apart as a country is losable. It's fragile. It needs protecting. And you can see that in the other headlines in today's news. Headline: threats mount against prosecutors and FBI agents working on Hunter Biden probe. Prosecutors and FBI agents involved in the Hunter Biden investigation have been the targets of threats and harassment, according to government officials and congressional testimony obtained by NBC News. Quote, it's part of a dramatic uptick in threats against FBI agents that has coincided with attacks on the FBI and the Justice Department by congressional Republicans and former President Donald Trump. The threats have prompted the FBI to create a standalone unit to investigate and mitigate them, according to previously unreleased congressional testimony. There's another one. Headline: FBI investigating violent threats against officials in Fulton County, Georgia. In the saga of the multiple criminal trials that are ahead for former president and Republican leading presidential candidate Donald Trump, one major thing we're waiting on right now, could happen at any time, is news on whether the federal judge overseeing Trump's case in D.C., the one about him trying to overturn the election, will that judge grant the prosecutor's request for an order that restricts the kinds of statements that Trump can make about that trial, so as to not prejudice the jury pool, so as not to intimidate witnesses. It's very striking. We're waiting on that order for the judge right now. But, in their request for that order from the judge, prosecutors had to give examples to the court of some of the times that Trump's overheated public statements have led his followers to commit violence or to threaten violence on his behalf. They included in their court filing the recent arrest of a Trump supporter in Texas who called the chambers of the federal judge who was overseeing that trial and threatened to kill the judge because Trump is on trial in her courtroom. I mean, all of these things, the court filing about the potential gag order, the threats to Fulton County officials, the threats to the FBI itself, I mean, these are all just in the past few days. But these headlines are just now the ambient mood of public service in the Trump era of Republican politics, right? It's Fulton County officials being threatened. It's the Fulton County sheriff having to investigate that. Then it's the Fulton County sheriff being threatened and the FBI having to investigate that. Then it's the FBI being threatened, FBI officials and FBI agents themselves being threatened, and the FBI having to investigate that. It's the judge in one of the Trump cases being threatened. It's another judge in another one of the Trump cases being threatened. It's the grand jurors in one of the Trump cases being threatened. It's the prosecutor in one Trump case being threatened. It's the prosecutor in another Trump case being threatened. It's a federal prosecutor in the Hunter Biden investigation getting, quote, such a barrage of credible threats that she had to seek security help from the U.S. Marshals Service. It's public health workers being threatened and harassed. It's the head of the CDC getting death threats. The head of the CDC. It's the staff of the National Archives being threatened. Sure, why not? Quote, the National Archives has been hit with a wave of threats since the FBI retrieved classified records from Trump's Mar-a-Lago club. It's the IRS being threatened. Quote, IRS launches safety review after right-wing threats. Republicans in Congress repeating baseless claims long made by extremists, experts say, potentially puts federal workers in danger. It's more than a dozen people now federally criminally charged with making threats to election workers all over the country. Now it's Republican U.S. Senator, former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney, telling his biographer about serving members of Congress in both the House and the Senate, confiding in him that they have taken specific votes in Congress that benefited Trump, specifically because they were afraid for their physical safety if they did not. They would have voted in a way not beneficial to Trump, but they felt physically threatened, and so they voted in a way beneficial to Trump. Quote, think of your personal safety. Think of your children. Why put your wife and children at risk? If public life, public service, even just regular citizen participation in regular politics is suffused with threats of violence now, one of the things that for sure does is it forces regular people out of politics and out of public service. Right? It is common sense. If politics and public service are being made into something that is quite literally dangerous, then in the normal course of events, normal people will steer clear. Right? That's part of why we have a protected, right to associate with others, even for political purposes in this country, right? You ought to be able to gather with others. You ought to be able to assemble. You have the right to assemble peaceably to seek the redress of grievances. Why do we have a right to peaceably assemble? So that people can assemble peaceably. So that you don't feel like trying to redress your grievances with the government is something that's going to expose you to physical danger, either from the government or from anyone else. We protect protesters. We protect people assembling peaceably to say their piece so that we can all peacefully say our piece, so our government will be accountable to us, so our government will continue to adapt to the needs and the wants and the voice of the people. What we have now is an atmosphere of ultra-right-wing political violence and threat, which doesn't only affect the individual politicians and civil servants and poll workers and law enforcement officials who are being directly targeted by Trump supporters. It has a systemic effect, too, right? Systemically, over time, it thins out, it hollows out the public sphere and government. So it's no longer for anybody. It's only for the brave and the militant, and those who themselves are willing to either abide threats of violence or issue them themselves. And that is not the kind of democracy we are. That is not what we are supposed to be. We are supposed to have a rollicking free press. We are supposed to have the constitutionally protected freedom to associate, freedom to assemble, including for political reasons, for redress of grievances from the government. We are supposed to have a vibrant, rollicking civil society. We're supposed to have no barrier to entry, participatory democracy at every level, from student government to school board to city hall to your locally elected dog catcher and alderman and state rep and president. If participation in public life at every level instead is cowed by people wielding guns and threats of mob violence and death threats and intimidation of witnesses and the doxing of grand jurors and all the rest of it, then at a fundamental level, we are just doing it wrong. We are doing it, in fact, like way too much of the rest of the world does it. And the fact that we haven't been that, the fact that we have been different, the fact that we have been a place where government is by and for the people is, at least until now, why so much of the world has been aspiring to come here when they can. Last week, we saw Republicans in the state of Wisconsin fire the widely praised, technocratic, nonpartisan administrator of elections in that crucial swing state, after she refused to help Wisconsin Republicans muddle or overturn the results of that state's presidential election in 2020. Republicans in the Wisconsin legislature were told by the attorney general of the state, they were told by their own lawyers in the legislature that they do not have the authority to fire this election official. But they went ahead and they are trying to do it anyway. This week, we'll see Republicans in the crucial swing state of North Carolina try to do effectively the same thing, as North Carolina Republicans this week are teeing up a vote to take over elections administration in that state, too. They have been trying to do this in North Carolina, but they have been blocked so far by voters in a clear state referendum. Also, multiple court rulings are standing in their way, too. But this week, they're apparently ready to go for it again, to take over the administration of elections in that swing state. Because heaven forbid we hold on to free and fair, technocratically sound and boring election administration in this country. Real small d democracy. Heaven forbid we hold on to that when instead we could trade it in for garbage, untrusted elections like everybody else has in so many parts of the rest of the world, which again is one of the things that sends good people of all those other countries in the world fleeing to us when they can. Because for so long we've done it better. Because our Constitution has led us to do it better. We have a good and rare thing going in this country. A republic, if we can keep it. Doesn't mean we don't have our problems. We have a good system for fixing our problems. We are listed as the in case of emergency contact in the phone of the whole rest of the world, which is something to be proud of. And it is something to fight hard to protect.